The Alpha King's elite warriors were trained to kill rogues, hunters, and enemies of the throne. They were not trained for a 5'3" Omega with bare feet and blood-soaked hands who smiled as she tore through them like they were made of paper. Commander Kael had served King Dominic Thorne for 15 years. He'd fought in the border wars, survived the Hunter Uprising, and personally executed 3 rogue alphas who'd challenged for the throne. He'd never once entered this throne room on his knees. Tonight, he could barely stand. The massive oak doors groaned as 2 of his remaining men pushed them open. Kael limped forward, every step sending fire through his shredded leg. Behind him, the survivors followed, 6 where there should have been 12. 6 broken warriors who couldn't meet their king's eyes. The throne room of Blackstone keeps stretched before them, all dark stone and flickering torchlight. At its far end, King Dominic Thorne rose slowly from his seat. He was everything an Alpha King should be, tall, broad-shouldered, with eyes the color of molten gold that could freeze a man's blood with a single glance. At 32, he'd ruled the Northern Territories for a decade, and in that time, no pack had dared challenge his authority. No rogue had survived his justice. No one had ever made his elite guard look like frightened pups. Report. The king's voice was quiet. That was worse than shouting. Kael dropped to one knee, wincing as the movement pulled at wounds that had barely stopped bleeding. Your Majesty. We found the rogue Omega as reported. Near Moonvale, at the forest's edge. And? She killed half my men in under 3 minutes. Silence crashed through the throne room. The advisors gathered along the walls exchanged glances. Lord Garrett, the king's oldest counselor, actually laughed, a nervous, disbelieving sound. An Omega? Garrett stepped forward, his gray beard bristling with contempt. Commander, perhaps you'd like to reconsider that report. Omegas don't fight. They certainly don't. She moved like smoke. Kael's voice cracked. He didn't care. Let them hear his fear. Let them understand. We couldn't track her, couldn't predict her. She had no formal training, I'd stake my life on it, but she knew where we'd strike before we moved. Like she could read our minds. That's impossible, another advisor muttered. Tell that to Marcus. Kael's jaw tightened. When he finally got her pinned, she smiled at him. Smiled. Then she dislocated her own shoulder to slip free of his grip. Broke his neck before he could blink. The throne room went completely still. Kael forced himself to continue. She could have killed all of us. She was faster, stronger than any Omega has a right to be. But she stopped. Let the 6 of us live. His voice dropped. She wanted us to deliver a message. King Dominic descended the steps from his throne, each footfall echoing like a death knell. He stopped directly in front of his kneeling commander. What message? Kael lifted his head. Met his king's burning gold eyes. Tell your king I'm coming for what he took from me. Something flickered across Dominic's face, there and gone before Kael could name it. But deep in the king's chest, something stirred. Something that had been silent for 3 long years. His wolf. It rose like a tide, pressing against his ribs, filling his lungs with a howl that wanted desperately to escape. Dominic clenched his fists, fighting for control. This hadn't happened since her. Since Elena, his fated mate, had died in his arms with their unborn child still inside her. 3 years of silence. 3 years of his wolf retreating so far into the darkness that Dominic had wondered if it would ever return. Now it surged forward, restless and hungry, fixated on one thing. A nameless, barefoot Omega who'd just slaughtered his best warriors. Your Majesty? Lord Garrett's voice was cautious. What are your orders? Shall we send the full battalion? Or perhaps notify the Hunter Council? They may want to handle this themselves if she's truly as dangerous as. No. Dominic's voice cut through the murmuring like a blade. His advisors fell silent. I want her found. He turned, golden eyes blazing with an intensity that made even his most seasoned counselors take a step back. I want her brought to me alive. Unharmed if possible. No exceptions. Your Majesty. Garrett sputtered. Surely that's unwise. This creature, this Omega, has clearly lost her mind. She's dangerous, possibly rabid. Standard protocol for rogues of this nature is immediate elimination. Did I ask for protocol, Garrett? The old lord snapped his mouth shut. Dominic stared at the far wall, but his mind was elsewhere, chasing a ghost through dark trees, following the scent of blood and something sweeter beneath it. His wolf paced inside him, whining with a need he didn't understand. Who are you? He thought. What did I take from you? He had enemies. Every king did. But this felt different. Personal in a way that scraped against old wounds. Find her, he said finally. Triple the patrols along the eastern border. I want every tracker, every scout we have searching those forests. And when you find her. He paused, jaw tight. You bring her to me. Only to me. He strode from the throne room without waiting for acknowledgement, his counsel's worried whispers fading behind him. Sarah Thorne had been eavesdropping. She knew it was beneath her station, she was the king's sister, after all, the pack historian and keeper of Blackstone's sacred records. She was supposed to be dignified. Proper. Above sneaking through servant passages and pressing her ear to hidden panels in the throne room walls. But curiosity had always been her greatest weakness. And lately, the secrets she'd been uncovering had made that weakness feel more like instinct. She waited until the throne room emptied, then slipped through a side passage to the archives beneath the keep. The stairs wound down into darkness, and Sarah counted each familiar step until she reached the heavy iron door at the bottom. The archives of Blackstone were her domain. Thousands of years of pack history, carefully preserved in scrolls and leather-bound tomes. Treaties, bloodlines, wars, alliances, all of it lived here in the cool, quiet dark. Including the things the royal family wanted forgotten. Sarah lit a candle and moved through the towering shelves until she reached the far corner, the section her brother had forbidden anyone from entering. The restricted archives, sealed after their mother's death 5 years ago. Queen Miriam Thorne had been many things, beautiful, cunning, utterly devoted to her son's reign. She'd also been ruthless in ways Sarah was only beginning to understand. The file she pulled from the bottom shelf was thin, easily overlooked. But the seal on its cover made her heart stutter. Her mother's personal mark. And beneath it, a single word written in red ink, burned. Except it hadn't been burned. Someone had hidden it here instead, tucked behind dusty records of long-dead treaties. Sarah broke the seal with trembling fingers. The file contained only a few pages. A birth certificate, names carefully redacted with black ink. Medical records she couldn't fully understand. And a photograph, old, faded, its edges worn soft. 2 children stared up at her. A young boy with golden eyes she would recognize anywhere, her brother, Dominic, perhaps 7 or 8 years old. And beside him, clinging to his hand, a tiny girl with dark hair and a smile that didn't reach her hollow eyes. On the back of the photograph, in her mother's elegant script, the aberration. Removed for the good of the bloodline. Never speak of this again. Sarah's blood ran cold. She flipped to the medical records, forcing herself to read despite the bile rising in her throat. The girl had been born wrong, according to her mother's notes. An Omega in a royal line that had only ever produced alphas. A weakness. A stain on the Thorne legacy. Removed. Not killed. The records would have said deceased if she'd died. No, this girl had been removed. Taken somewhere. Hidden. And judging by what Sarah had just heard from the throne room, she hadn't stayed hidden. Tell your king I'm coming for what he took from me. Sarah stared at the photograph until her candle sputtered. Then she pressed it to her chest and closed her eyes. Oh, Dominic, she whispered. What did Mother do? 20 miles away, deep in the ancient forest that bordered Moonvale, a woman sat alone in the darkness. Wren had found a hollow between the roots of an old oak, shelter enough for the night. Her wounds had stopped bleeding hours ago, the shallow cuts already closing with a speed that shouldn't have been possible for an Omega. Another gift she didn't want. Another reminder of everything they'd tried to burn out of her. She worked methodically, wrapping a strip of cloth around her dislocated shoulder after forcing it back into place. The pain was distant, almost boring. She'd felt worse. Survived worse. 20 years, she thought, tying off the bandage. 20 years of worse. When she was finished, she reached into the small pouch at her belt and pulled out the only thing she'd managed to keep all these years. The only proof she had that her memories weren't madness. A photograph, so worn the images were almost ghosts. A little girl in a white dress, holding the hand of a golden-eyed boy who was looking down at her like she was something precious. She didn't remember his face. Didn't remember his voice or his name or any of the moments this photograph was supposed to represent. The trauma had taken those memories, buried them under years of pain and darkness. But she remembered her. The woman who'd come in the night. The queen with cold eyes and a colder heart who'd torn a 3-year-old from her bed and handed her to strangers with one simple command: make her disappear. The experiments came later. The cages. The doctors who wanted to understand why an Omega could do things no Omega should. They'd broken her 100 different ways, and when she finally escaped, she'd had nothing left except a photograph she'd stolen from a dead nurse's pocket and a name she'd pulled from forgotten files. Thorn. She was a Thorn. Daughter of Queen Miriam. Sister to the Alpha King. Wren traced the boy's faded face with one scarred finger. He'd been a child when they took her. He might not even remember she existed. But their mother had known. Their mother had ordered it. And now that mother was dead, buried in a crypt beneath Blackstone Keep, beyond any justice Wren could deliver. Which left only one option. Soon, brother. Wren's voice was barely a whisper, hollow as her eyes. Soon you'll know what our mother did to me. She tucked the photograph away and leaned back against the oak's rough bark. In the distance, she could hear the patrol wolves beginning their search, their howls cutting through the night. Let them come. Let them hunt. She'd been the prey for 20 years. Now she was something else entirely. And the Alpha King was about to learn that some monsters weren't born, they were made. By the very families who should have protected them. Wanting to see what would happen next, subscribe to this channel too. Get to listen to more of our upcoming exciting stories. Click on the subscribe button now. Thank you. Chapter 2. 16 years ago. The royal nursery glowed with candlelight, warm and golden against the cold stone walls of Blackstone Keep. Outside, a winter storm held across the Northern Territories, but inside, everything was still. Waiting. Queen Miriam Thorn stood at the foot of 2 identical cradles, her silver gown pooling around her feet like moonlight. She'd been beautiful once, still was, some said, but tonight her face was carved from ice. No warmth. No maternal softness. Only calculation. Show me, she said. The midwife, an aging wolf named Hesta who'd delivered 3 generations of Thorns, hesitated. Her weathered hands trembled as she lifted the first bundle from its cradle. The boy, Your Majesty. Strong lungs, strong heart. His wolf essence is already present, I've never felt one so powerful in a newborn. He'll be a true alpha. Perhaps the strongest this bloodline has ever produced. Miriam's lips curved. Not quite a smile. She reached out one elegant finger and traced her son's cheek. He didn't cry, didn't fuss. Just opened his eyes, already shifting toward gold, and stared at his mother like he was memorizing her face. Dominic, she murmured. Yes. He'll do. And the girl, Your Majesty? Miriam's expression flickered. Show me. Hesta's hesitation stretched longer this time. When she finally lifted the second bundle, her arms were shaking so badly the baby stirred, letting out a thin, reedy cry. She's smaller. Her wolf essence is present, but it's... The midwife swallowed. It's submissive, my queen. The markers are clear. She's an Omega. The word dropped like a stone into still water. Miriam stared at her daughter. The girl was tiny, dark-haired where her brother was fair, with eyes that hadn't yet decided what color they'd become. She reached toward her mother with one small hand, fingers grasping at nothing. That's impossible. Miriam's voice was quiet. Dangerous. There hasn't been an Omega born to the royal bloodline in 400 years. We bred that weakness out. These things happen, Your Majesty. Recessive traits can. I know what recessive traits can do. Miriam turned away from the cradle. From her daughter. Does anyone else know? Only myself and the attending physician. And your husband, of course. My husband will be told what I decide to tell him. Miriam walked to the window, watching the storm rage beyond the glass. An Omega princess. Can you imagine what our enemies would do with that information? The royal house of Thorn, producing weakness? We'd have challengers at our gates within the month. Perhaps she could be raised quietly, away from... No. Miriam's shoulders straightened. When she turned back, her face was a mask of cold resolve. She was never born. Do you understand me, Hesta? There was only one child tonight. One heir. The girl. She paused, and something almost like regret flickered in her eyes. Almost. The girl will be sent away. For her own protection. The midwife clutched the baby tighter. Sent where, my queen? Miriam didn't answer. She swept toward the door, pausing with her hand on the frame. You have 1 hour to make the arrangements. If anyone ever asks, my daughter died in the night. A tragedy. These things happen. Her voice hardened. If I hear otherwise from any lips, including yours, I'll have your tongue removed before your execution. Are we clear? Hesta bowed her head. Tears slipped down her weathered cheeks and landed on the baby's blanket. Yes, Your Majesty. The door closed. The candles flickered. And in her cradle, Ren Thorn, Princess of Blackstone, sister to the future king, disappeared from history. Present day. The war room of Blackstone Keep hadn't seen this much tension since the Hunter Uprising. Maps covered every surface, marked with patrol routes and search grids. A dozen of the crown's best strategists argued over logistics while servants rushed to keep the coffee flowing. At the center of it all, Ronan Ashwell stood perfectly still. He was a beta, which meant he'd never sit on a throne or lead a pack. He'd made peace with that decades ago. What he did have was the best nose in the Northern Territories and a blood debt to the crown that he'd spent his whole life repaying. King Dominic had saved his daughter from hunters when she was 7 years old. Had personally ripped the throat out of the man who'd been about to put a silver bullet in her skull. Ronan would walk through fire for this king. Would track any prey. Hunt any target. Even a ghost. The trail goes cold here. Ronan tapped a point on the map, the edge of the Moonvale Forest, where the attack had happened. She's good. Better than good. She knows how to mask her scent, double back, lay false tracks. I've never seen anything like it. But you can find her. It wasn't a question. Ronan turned to face his king. Dominic stood apart from the others, arms crossed, jaw tight. He'd been like this for 2 days, coiled, restless, practically vibrating with something that looked almost like desperation. I can find her, Ronan confirmed. But it'll take time. Whoever this woman is, she's been trained to disappear. Professionally trained. Then find out where that training came from. Dominic pushed off the wall, moving toward the door. I want reports every 6 hours. No exceptions. Your Majesty. Ronan's voice stopped him. Where are you going? Dominic didn't turn around. I have business in the border towns. I'll be traveling light. Under a different name. The room went quiet. Ronan felt the other strategists exchanging worried glances, but no one dared speak. Kings didn't travel incognito to border towns while dangerous rogues were at large. Kings stayed safe behind stone walls and let others handle the hunting. But this king who'd been half dead inside for 3 years, whose wolf had gone so silent the whole pack whispered about it, this king was already walking out the door. Ronan sighed. Pulled the map toward him and began memorizing every trail, every crossing, every possible hiding place. He'd find the Omega. One way or another. He just hoped his king didn't find her first. Sarah read the document 3 times before her hands stopped shaking enough to turn the page. She'd been in the restricted archives for nearly 48 hours, surviving on cold tea and the rolls she'd smuggled in from the kitchen. Her eyes burned. Her back ached from hunching over dusty files. But she couldn't stop. Every page she turned made the horror worse. The Ashford Institute, she whispered, reading the name again. And again. As if repetition could make it less real. She'd heard rumors, of course. Every wolf had. A black market facility somewhere in the Eastern Territories that bought unusual wolves with rare abilities or strange bloodlines, and studied them. The kind of studying that involved locked cages and surgical tools and screaming that never quite stopped. The institute had been raided and shut down 2 years ago, its doctors scattered to the winds, its records supposedly destroyed. Sarah had thought it was a ghost story. A nightmare parents told misbehaving pups to frighten them into obedience. She hadn't known her mother was a client. The transaction records were meticulous. Dated entries spanning 16 years, each one signed in Queen Miriam's elegant hand. Payment schedules. Progress reports. Medical updates on Subject 7, later redesignated as the aberration, detailing the various treatments being administered to correct the Omega deficiency. Sarah's stomach lurched. She forced herself to keep reading. Subject shows remarkable resilience. Standard conditioning protocols ineffective. Recommending escalation to Phase 3 procedures. Phase 3 initiated. Subject survived 17 hours of enhanced stimulus before losing consciousness. Unprecedented result. Requesting additional funding for further study. Anomalous readings detected. Subject's wolf essence appears to be adapting. Absorbing external energy rather than rejecting it. This was not the intended outcome. Requesting guidance from benefactor. The final entry was dated 2 years ago. Just one line, written in a different hand than the clinical reports that preceded it. Subject escaped. Facility compromised. All records to be destroyed. May God forgive us for what we created. Sarah closed the file. Her sister. Her sister had been alive all these years, locked in a nightmare factory while Sarah grew up safe in Blackstone Keep, complaining about boring lessons and strict tutors. While Dominic trained to be king, their baby sister was being tortured in their mother's name. And now she was coming for revenge. Sarah pressed her palms against her eyes until she saw stars. She had to tell Dominic. Had to warn him, explain, make him understand that he was hunting his own blood. But would he believe her? Would he even care? He'd adored their mother. Everyone had. Miriam Thorne had been beloved by her people, mourned by the entire territory when she died. Dominic still kept her portrait in his private chambers, still visited her tomb every month. How do you tell your brother that their mother was a monster? Sarah gathered the files with trembling hands. She didn't have an answer. But she had proof. And somewhere out there, she had a sister who deserved the truth. Even if the truth might get them all killed. The border town of Harrow's Crossing was exactly the kind of place respectable wolves avoided. Built at the junction of 3 territorial lines, it belonged to no one and answered to no king. Merchants traded in goods that didn't bear close inspection. Information flowed like whiskey. And the tavern at its center, a sprawling, smoky establishment called the Broken Crown, catered to anyone with coin and sense enough to mind their own business. Ren had been here for 2 days, watching, listening, planning her next move. The memories wouldn't leave her alone. They came at night, when her defenses were down, flashes of white rooms and silver instruments, of voices that called her subject instead of a name, of pain so absolute it had burned away everything soft inside her. She remembered the exact moment she'd stopped screaming. Stopped begging. Stopped hoping anyone would save her. She'd been 11 years old. After that, she'd become something else. Something cold and patient and very, very dangerous. She'd learned to watch her captors, memorize their patterns, catalog their weaknesses. She'd let them think they'd broken her while she planned her escape with the precision of a general mapping a war. And when they'd pushed her too far, when Dr. Ashford himself had decided to see just how much pain she could absorb before her heart stopped, something inside her had finally answered. She still didn't fully understand what she'd become. The Institute's experiments had been trying to suppress her Omega nature, to force her wolf into something it wasn't meant to be. Instead, they'd unlocked something ancient in her blood. A dormant ability that had last appeared in the Thorn bloodline 4 centuries ago, in a princess who'd turned an entire enemy army against itself. Ren could absorb the power of any wolf who attacked her. Their strength flowed into her like water into a vessel, leaving them weakened while she grew stronger. The more powerful her opponent, the more she took. The 12 warriors who'd tried to capture her near Moonvale had each been strong enough to kill an ordinary Omega with one blow. When she'd finished with them, she could have torn down mountains. It never lasted. The stolen power faded within hours, leaving her exhausted and aching. But in those moments of borrowed strength, she was something close to invincible. And she only needed a few moments to kill a king. The tavern door opened, letting in a gust of cold air and a man who made every head turn. He was tall. Broad-shouldered. Dressed in common traveling clothes that couldn't quite hide the way he moved, like a predator wearing sheep's clothing. His face was shadowed by a hood, but Ren caught the strong line of his jaw, the determined set of his mouth. Something stirred in her chest. A warning. A recognition. Dangerous, her instincts whispered. Pay attention. She watched him move to the bar, exchange words with the keeper, accept a mug of something dark. He carried himself like a man used to being obeyed, even though nothing in his appearance suggested authority. Most wouldn't notice. Most weren't trained to see past surfaces. Ren noticed everything. She went back to her drink, but her awareness stayed locked on him. Tracking his movements as he took a table in the corner. Noting the way his gaze swept the room, methodical, assessing. When those eyes found hers, she felt the impact like a physical blow. Gold. His eyes were gold, catching the tavern's firelight and throwing it back like molten metal. And they'd frozen on her face with an intensity that made her breath catch. Do I know you? She thought. Have we met? The man rose from his table. Ren's hand drifted toward the knife hidden beneath her coat. Every instinct screamed at her to run, to fight, to do something, but her body wouldn't obey. She sat paralyzed as he crossed the room toward her, each step winding something tighter in her chest. He stopped at her table. Up close, he was even more striking, sharp cheekbones, a day's growth of stubble shadowing his jaw, and those impossible golden eyes that seemed to see straight through her defenses. This seat taken? His voice was deep. Rough. Like he wasn't used to asking permission for anything. Say no, the smart part of her brain insisted. Walk away. Now. Help yourself, she heard herself say. He sat across from her. The small table suddenly felt like no barrier at all. She was aware of him in ways that made no sense, the warmth radiating from his body, the steady rhythm of his heartbeat, the scent of pine and wood smoke and something darker underneath. Her wolf, dormant and quiet for so many years, suddenly lunged against her ribs. Mate. The word exploded through her consciousness like a bomb. No. No, that was impossible. She'd never felt a mate bond, had assumed the Institute's experiments had burned that capability out of her along with everything else. She wasn't even sure she was capable of feeling anything anymore beyond anger and determination and the cold satisfaction of crossing names off her list. But her wolf was howling now, straining toward this stranger with desperate need. Mate. Ours. Finally. Mate. Across the table, the man's pupils had blown wide. His breathing had gone ragged. He was staring at her like she'd just driven a blade through his heart, like he'd seen a ghost. "Who are you?" he breathed. Ren opened her mouth, but before she could answer, the tavern door burst open. 6 wolves poured in, armed and moving in formation. At their head, a scarred beta with cold eyes swept the room and locked onto her with the focus of a born tracker. "There." The beta's voice cut through the noise. "The Omega. Take her alive." Everything happened at once. Ren exploded to her feet, overturning the table. The stranger lunged upright with a snarl that shook the walls. The tracking team surged forward, patrons scrambling to get out of their way. But in the chaos, one frozen moment stretched between Ren and the golden-eyed man. She saw him clearly now. Saw the authority in his stance, the wolf essence rolling off him in waves of pure alpha dominance. Saw the face she'd memorized from a dozen stolen portraits during her years of planning. King Dominic Thorne. Her brother. Her mate. Their eyes met. She watched the recognition dawn in his face, watched him connect the Omega he was hunting with the woman whose presence had just shattered his world. Fate, Ren whispered, something cracking behind her ribs, has a sick sense of humor. She threw herself backward through the window. Glass exploded around her. She hit the ground rolling, was on her feet and running before the first tracker cleared the tavern door. Behind her, she heard a roar of pure anguish, a sound that shouldn't have mattered, shouldn't have reached inside her chest and torn. Dominic was screaming her name. Not her designation. Not Omega or Rogue were target. Her name. Like he'd somehow always known it. Like he'd been waiting his whole life to say it. Ren. She ran faster. Let the darkness swallow her. And refused, absolutely refused, to acknowledge the tears streaming down her face. If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 3. The ride back to Blackstone Keep took 6 hours. Dominic didn't remember a single mile of it. His wolf raged inside him, clawing at his ribs, howling with a grief that had no name. Mate. She's our mate. Go back. Find her. Mate. He'd spent 15 years learning to master his instincts. To be the king his people needed, controlled, rational, unshakable. Now he sat on his horse like a puppet with cut strings, letting the animal carry him home while his mind replayed those final moments in an endless, agonizing loop. Her face when she'd recognized him. The way her eyes had widened, then shuddered. The crack in her voice when she'd whispered about fate. And that single, devastating word she'd left hanging in the air as she'd exploded through the window, brother. She knew. Somehow, she knew they were connected by more than the mate bond. She'd called him brother like a curse, like a condemnation, like the worst thing a person could be. Dominic tightened his grip on the reins until his knuckles went white. He couldn't hunt her. Every cell in his body rejected the thought of hurting her, capturing her, doing anything that might cause her pain. The mate bond had sunk its hooks into him so deep he could barely breathe around them. But he couldn't let her go, either. She was dismantling everything he'd built, everything his family had protected for generations. She'd killed his warriors. Threatened his throne. And based on that message she'd sent with his surviving men, she wanted him dead. Tell your king I'm coming for what he took from me. What had he taken? What could she possibly think he'd stolen from a woman he'd never met, never known existed until 3 days ago? The gates of Blackstone Keep loomed ahead, torches blazing against the pre-dawn darkness. Dominic straightened in his saddle, forcing his face into the mask of calm authority his people expected. Whatever was happening, whatever impossible truth was unraveling around him, he couldn't let anyone see him breaking. He was still the king. And kings didn't fall apart. Sarah was waiting in his private chambers. She stood by the window, silhouetted against the gray morning light, clutching a leather folder to her chest. Her face was pale, her eyes red-rimmed from crying or sleeplessness or both. Dominic. She said his name like a prayer. Like a warning. He closed the door behind him. Whatever it is, Sarah, it can wait. It can't wait. She crossed the room and pressed the folder into his hands. You need to see this. Now. Before anyone else finds you, before the council demands a report, before you do anything else, you need to know the truth. Something in her voice made him stop. Made him actually look at her for the first time since he'd entered the room. His little sister had always been the soft one. The dreamer. She spent her days buried in ancient texts and dusty archives, more comfortable with the dead than the living. He'd never seen her look like this, fierce and frightened and determined all at once. What truth? He asked. Open it. Dominic carried the folder to his desk. His hands were steady as he broke the seal, he made sure of that, but something cold was spreading through his chest. A premonition. A warning. The first page was a birth certificate. 2 names, 2 dates. Twins born to Queen Miriam Thorne on a winter's night 32 years ago. Dominic Alder Thorne. Male. Alpha. Wren Miriam Thorne. Female. Omega. He stopped breathing. Keep reading, Sarah whispered. He turned the page. Medical records, clinical and cold. Transaction records, each one bearing their mother's signature. Progress reports on something called Subject 7, later the aberration, describing procedures and protocols and outcomes that made his vision blur with rage. Subject shows remarkable resilience. Standard conditioning protocols ineffective. Phase 3 initiated. Subject survived 17 hours of enhanced stimulus before losing consciousness. Requesting additional funding for further study. The folder fell from his hands. Paper scattered across the desk, across the floor, damning evidence of a crime so monstrous he couldn't wrap his mind around it. A twin, he said. His voice didn't sound like his own. I had a twin sister. Born the same night you were. Mother had her removed within hours. Sarah's words tumbled out in a rush, like she'd been holding them back for days. She sold her, Dominic. Sold her own daughter to a place called the Ashford Institute. They experimented on her for 16 years. Tortured her. And the whole time, Mother kept paying them, kept funding their research, kept. Stop. The word came out as a snarl, more wolf than man. Sarah flinched but didn't back away. You needed to know. The woman who attacked your warriors, the Omega everyone's hunting, she's our sister. She survived that place, escaped 2 years ago, and now she's coming for revenge against the family that destroyed her life. Dominic slammed his fist into the desk. The ancient oak cracked under the impact, splitting down the middle with a sound like a gunshot. She thinks I knew. The realization crashed over him like a wave, dragging him under. She thinks I was part of it. That I stood by while our mother. He couldn't finish the sentence. Couldn't make his mouth form words around the horror of it. Wren's eyes in that tavern. The hatred burning beneath the shock of the mate bond. The way she'd looked at him like he was the monster, like he was everything she'd spent 16 years learning to destroy. She thought he was complicit. She thought he'd known about the torture, the experiments, the systematic destruction of his own twin sister, and done nothing. I mourned her. His voice cracked. I kept her portrait in my chambers. I visited her tomb every month. I thought she loved me. Sarah moved closer, reaching for his arm. Dominic. She sold our sister to butchers. He turned away from her touch, unable to bear comfort when his entire world was collapsing. Our mother sold her own child, and I spent 20 years worshipping her memory. The grief hit him then. Not for his mother, that woman was dead to him now in ways that had nothing to do with the illness that took her. But for Ren. For the sister he should have protected. For the little girl in that birth certificate who'd been torn from her family and thrown to wolves of an entirely different kind. He'd felt the echo of her pain through the mate bond during the ride home. Distant, muffled, but undeniable, a deep, old ache that never quite stopped. 16 years of suffering, carved into her very essence. And she thought he'd caused it. I have to find her. He straightened, shoving the anguish down where it couldn't interfere with what needed to be done. I have to explain. You can't. Sarah grabbed his arm, forcing him to look at her. Think, Dominic. She's been publicly accusing Blackstone of involvement with the Institute. She appeared at the Southern Summit 3 days ago with documents, witnesses, survivor testimony. 3 of our allied pacts have already withdrawn their treaties. Others are demanding investigations. What? She's not just coming for your life. She's dismantling your entire reign. Sarah's grip tightened. If you go after her now, if you reveal the mate bond or the family connection, it will look like you're trying to silence her. You'll prove every accusation she's making. Dominic wrenched free of her grasp and stalked to the window. Outside, the sun was rising over his kingdom, the kingdom his mother had built on lies and blood and the broken body of his twin sister. Then what do I do? He demanded. Let her destroy everything? Let her believe I was part of the torture? I don't know. Sarah's voice was small. I don't know how to fix this, Dominic. I don't know if it can be fixed. He pressed his forehead against the cold glass and closed his eyes. Somewhere out there, Ren was planning her next attack. And the mate bond between them thrummed with her rage, her pain, her unshakable conviction that he deserved to suffer. He was starting to think she might be right. 300 miles away, Ren stood before the assembled alphas of 4 sovereign pacts and watched Dominic Thorne's world burn. The Southern Summit had been a gamble. Walking into a room full of wolves who could kill her with a single blow, armed with nothing but documents and the desperate hope that her evidence would speak louder than her Omega status. It had worked better than she'd dreamed. These records prove that the Royal House of Blackstone funded the Ashford Institute for over 16 years. She kept her voice steady, professional, emotionless. Queen Miriam Thorne personally signed every transaction. Every payment. Every approval for the experiments conducted on wolves like me. Alpha Kira Voss of the Eastern Reach leaned forward, her silver hair gleaming in the council chamber's torchlight. And you expect us to believe the current king had no knowledge of this? I expect you to investigate and reach your own conclusions. Ren met the older woman's gaze without flinching. What I know is that Dominic Thorne inherited his mother's crown, her armies, and her alliances. If he inherited her crimes as well, that's for this council to determine. Murmurs rippled through the assembled wolves. Alpha Voss exchanged glances with Alpha Chen of the Western Holdings, who'd been reviewing the documents with increasing horror. The survivor testimony is damning, Chen said quietly. 6 wolves willing to swear under blood oath that Blackstone gold kept them in cages. The institute was destroyed 2 years ago, another Alpha pointed out. Whatever crimes occurred there. The wolves who suffered don't care about timelines. Ren's control slipped for just a moment, letting an edge of raw fury color her words. They care about justice. They care about making sure the families who paid for their torment face consequences. She could feel their attention shifting, their loyalty to Blackstone wavering. 3 pacts had already announced they were withdrawing from their treaties pending investigation. 2 more were close to following. It wasn't enough. It would never be enough to balance the scales. But it was a start. brother, the dark voice in her mind whispered. Mate. She crushed the thought viciously. The mate bond was a complication, nothing more. A cosmic joke at her expense. The one person in existence she was destined to love was the same person who represented everything she hated, the crown, the power, the family that had sold her to monsters. She refused to let fate dictate her heart. Refused to let biology override 16 years of justified rage. Even if she woke every night from dreams of golden eyes. Even if her wolf whined constantly, straining toward a connection she'd never asked for and didn't want. He didn't know, some traitorous part of her whispered. You saw his face in that tavern. He didn't know. It didn't matter. He still wore the crown. Still benefited from the Thorn legacy. Still represented everything she'd sworn to destroy. Whether he was ignorant or complicit, the result was the same. He had to fall. The assassination attempt came 3 weeks later. Dominic was reviewing reports in his study, another ally lost, another demand for investigation, another piece of his kingdom crumbling, when the door opened and Lord Garrett stepped inside. Your Majesty. The old advisor's voice was strange. Tight. I brought tea. Dominic didn't look up from his papers. I didn't ask for tea. No. But you need it. Garrett crossed the room, setting a steaming cup on the desk. You've barely slept in weeks. The council is worried. The council was terrified, more like. Terrified of the Omega who was systematically destroying their alliances. Terrified of the investigations being launched into Blackstone's connection to the Institute. Terrified that their king seemed more interested in staring at walls than fighting back. They didn't know about the mate bond. Didn't know that Dominic spent every night drowning in dreams of his sister, feeling her pain through the connection they shared, waking with her name on his lips and her hatred in his chest. Thank you, Garrett. He reached for the cup automatically, bringing it to his lips. The scent hit him a heartbeat before the poison would have. Wolfsbane. Just a trace, not enough to kill an ordinary wolf immediately, but enough to weaken him. Make him vulnerable. Slow his healing until any subsequent attack would be fatal. Dominic's eyes snapped to Garrett's face. The old advisor had retreated toward the door, his hand on the knife at his belt. You, Dominic breathed. The Institute's exposure will destroy us all. Garrett's voice shook, but his grip on the knife was steady. The Queen trusted me with the truth years ago. Trusted me to protect the crown's secrets. If the investigations continue, if that Omega keeps talking. So you'd murder your king to keep those secrets buried? I'd do what's necessary. Garrett drew the blade. Just as your mother did. Just as every Thorn has done when the kingdom demanded sacrifice. He lunged. Dominic knocked the cup aside and surged to his feet, but the confined space worked against him. Garrett was old but experienced, and he'd positioned himself between Dominic and escape. The knife slashed toward Dominic's throat. And stopped 6 inches from his skin, caught in a grip that shouldn't have been there. Ren materialized from the shadows like a ghost, her hand wrapped around Garrett's wrist, her face a mask of cold fury. She twisted once, sharply, and the old advisor screamed as his bones snapped. The knife clattered to the floor. Garrett followed it, crumpling into a sobbing heap. Ren stood over him, breathing hard, staring at her own hands like they'd betrayed her. I didn't. She looked up at Dominic, and for just a moment, her mask cracked. Horror flooded her features. Confusion. Fear. I didn't mean to, my wolf just. The mate bond. She'd intervened on pure instinct, her wolf refusing to let their mate die even when her human mind still wanted him destroyed. Dominic stepped toward her. Ren. Don't. She stumbled backward, nearly tripping over Garrett's prone form. This doesn't change anything. This doesn't mean. You saved my life. I didn't choose to save your life. The words exploded out of her, raw and ragged. I came here to watch you die, and instead she pressed her palms against her temples, as if trying to shove her own thoughts back into order. This bond is a cage. I won't let it control me. I won't. Then don't. Dominic held up his hands, showing her he wasn't a threat. But before you run again, let me show you something. Something I didn't know existed until 3 weeks ago. She hesitated. Every line of her body screamed distressed, but she didn't bolt. That alone felt like a victory. The archives, he continued. The documents my sister found. And a letter our mother left me that I've never been able to open. His voice roughened. I didn't know, Ren. I swear to you on our father's grave, on whatever bond fate has forced between us, I didn't know you existed until you sent my warriors home in pieces. Her eyes searched his face. Looking for lies. Looking for the monster she'd built him into. Show me, she finally said. And if you're lying, I'll finish what your advisor started. The archives were cold and dark, exactly as Ren remembered from the files she'd stolen during her research. But walking through them beside Dominic, beside her brother, her mate, her enemy, felt like descending into a nightmare. He showed her everything. The documents Sarah had uncovered. The transaction records. The progress reports that detailed her own torture in clinical, bloodless language. He didn't flinch. Didn't look away. Just watched her face as she absorbed each new piece of evidence, his own expression carved from stone. Our mother did this, he said when she'd finished. I didn't know. My father didn't know, he died believing she sent you to a sanctuary for your own protection. The only people who knew the truth were Mother and the advisor who just tried to kill me. Ren's hands were shaking. She couldn't make them stop. You expect me to believe. I expect you to read this. He pulled a sealed envelope from his coat. Old, yellowed, with their mother's personal mark pressed into the wax. She left letters for both of us when she died. I've carried mine for 3 years but couldn't bring myself to open it. The grief was too fresh. He pressed the envelope into her hands. Read it, he said. Read what our mother had to say for herself. And then tell me if I'm lying. Ren's fingers trembled as she broke the seal. The letter was short. Just a few paragraphs in their mother's elegant handwriting, the ink slightly blurred in places as if tears had fallen on it while she wrote. My son. By the time you read this, I will be dead, and you will have learned the truth about your sister. I could offer excuses, the kingdom's stability, the bloodline's strength, the impossible choice between one child and everything else. But there are no excuses for what I did. I sold my daughter to monsters. I told myself it was necessary. I told myself Omegas were weak, expendable, that removing her would protect you and the throne. I was wrong. I was weak. I chose the kingdom over my own blood, and I damned us all. Find her if you can. Tell her I'm sorry. Tell her I dreamed of her every night for 16 years and woke up screaming. Tell her the illness that's killing me feels like justice. Forgive me, my son. Or don't. I don't deserve it either way. Your mother. The letter slipped from Ren's fingers. She was crying. She didn't know when she'd started, but tears were streaming down her face, dripping from her chin, and she couldn't breathe through the sobs that tore out of her throat. 16 years. 16 years of hatred, focused and refined and sharpened into a weapon pointed directly at the Thorne family. And now the villain she'd built her entire identity around destroying was already dead. Had died knowing exactly what she'd done. Had spent her final years dreaming of the daughter she'd condemned to hell. Ren's voice broke. I don't know how to. Dominic's arms came around her. She should have pulled away. Should have fought him, rejected the comfort he offered, maintained the walls she'd spent 2 decades building. But her wolf was keening with a grief that had no outlet, and his presence felt like the first warmth she'd known since childhood. She let herself be held. Just for a moment. Just long enough to remember what it felt like to not be alone. When she finally pulled back, his golden eyes were wet too. "What do we do now?" she whispered. Before he could answer, the door to the archives burst open. Sarah stood in the doorway, gasping for breath, her face white with terror. "The scouts just reported in." She grabbed the doorframe like she might collapse without it. "The Ashford Institute, it wasn't destroyed when Wren escaped. It was moved. Relocated to the Southern Territories under new patronage." Dominic went rigid. "Whose patronage?" "Alpha Marcus Vane." Sarah's voice shook. "The king of the Southern Territories. He's been using the Institute's research to breed an army, Dominic. Weaponized wolves, dozens of them, trained and enhanced and absolutely loyal." Wren's blood turned to ice. She knew that name. Vane had visited the Institute once, years ago, touring the facilities with the detached interest of a man evaluating livestock. She'd been 12 years old, strapped to a table while doctors discussed her anomalous readings. He'd looked at her like she was a particularly interesting specimen. "He's been waiting," she breathed. "Waiting for Blackstone to destabilize. Waiting for my accusations to weaken your alliances." Sarah nodded, tears spilling down her cheeks. "His army crossed the southern border an hour ago. They'll reach the outer territories by nightfall." Dominic's hand found Wren's, their fingers intertwining without conscious thought. "The invasion begins at dawn," Sarah whispered. "If you're still listening to this story up to this point, why don't you subscribe to this channel to continue getting impactful daily stories like this? We would be most grateful if you can do that to help boost this video to reach everyone. Thank you. Chapter 4. The Horizon Burned. Wren stood on the eastern ramparts of Blackstone Keep, watching 300 points of torchlight snake through the valley below. The Southern Army moved like a living thing, organized and relentless, their enhanced wolves visible even at this distance, larger than natural, their movements too precise, too coordinated. The Institute's legacy, come to devour the kingdom that had funded its birth. "Our scouts count 300 enhanced wolves." Dominic's voice came from behind her, rough with exhaustion. He'd been in the war room for 6 hours, rallying what remained of his forces, trying to build a defense from broken alliances and diminished numbers. "We have 150 warriors fit for battle. Maybe another 50 if we arm the household guards. 2-to-1 odds. Against wolves who'd been engineered for combat, whose pain receptors had been burned away, whose instincts had been sharpened into weapons." Wren knew exactly what those wolves had survived to become what they were. She'd survived the same thing. The only difference was that she'd escaped before they could finish breaking her. "The Institute created them," she said quietly. "Enhanced strength, diminished fear response, accelerated healing. I saw the research notes before I burned them. Can they be stopped? They can be killed. But it takes more than ordinary force." She turned to face him. "They won't feel pain. They won't hesitate. They'll keep fighting until their bodies physically give out." Dominic's jaw tightened. In the torchlight, he looked older than his 32 years, worn down by weeks of political collapse and the weight of his mother's sins. But his eyes still burned gold, and his wolf still radiated the power that made him the most feared alpha in the Northern Territories. "Then we make their bodies give out," he said simply. Behind them, the war horn sounded. First Assembly. The warriors of Blackstone were gathering for what might be their final battle. "Dominic." Wren caught his arm before he could turn away. "I could leave. Disappear into the forest like I've done 100 times before. This isn't my fight. These aren't my people." He went very still. "Is that what you want? Was it?" 3 weeks ago, she would have watched Blackstone burn with satisfaction. Would have seen it as justice. The kingdom that sold her into hell, consumed by the very program built on her suffering. Poetic. Complete. The revenge she'd spent 16 years dreaming of. But that was before she'd read her mother's letter. Before she'd felt Dominic's arms around her in the archives. Before her wolf had finally stopped howling for vengeance and started whimpering for something else entirely. Home, it whispered. Pack. Mate. Family. She'd never had any of those things. Had trained herself to stop wanting them, to need nothing but survival and the next name on her list. Now the list was empty. And she was standing on the walls of a kingdom that had never known she existed, beside a brother she'd just learned to stop hating, facing an army that would kill them both. No, she said finally. It's not what I want. Dominic's hand covered hers. Warm. Solid. An anchor in the storm. Then fight with me, he said. Not as the Omega Ghost. Not as the weapon the Institute accidentally created. His voice dropped, rough with emotion. Fight as Ren Thorn. Princess of Blackstone. My sister. Something cracked open in her chest. Something that had been sealed shut for 16 years. I don't know how to be a princess, she whispered. Neither do I. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. We'll figure it out together. If we survive the night. The Southern Army struck at dawn. They came through the eastern pass like a tide of shadows, their enhanced wolves leading the charge while foot soldiers followed behind. The sound of their approach was thunder, hundreds of paws hitting frozen ground, hundreds of throats releasing battle cries that shook the very stones of Blackstone Keep. Ren met them at the front lines. She'd never fought beside anyone before. Had never trusted another wolf enough to leave her back exposed. But when Dominic took position at her right, his massive gray wolf form bristling with power, something clicked into place. The mate bond flared between them, bright and fierce and undeniable. She could feel his heartbeat syncing with hers, his wolf's instincts layering over her own. When he surged forward, she knew exactly where he'd strike. When she dodged left, he was already covering the space she'd abandoned. The first wave of enhanced wolves crashed against them like water against rock. Ren's ability activated instantly. The first wolf to reach her was massive, easily twice her size, engineered for pure destruction. His claws raked toward her throat. And she absorbed the blow. Power flooded into her, savage and intoxicating. The wolf stumbled, weakened, and she redirected his own strength into a strike that shattered his spine. He dropped without a sound. Two more came at her simultaneously. She took their attacks, drank their power, and used it to tear through them before they could recover from the sudden drain. Beside her, Dominic's wolf fought with devastating precision, protecting her flank during the split seconds when her ability reset and she was vulnerable. They moved like one creature. Two halves of a whole, finally reunited. Push forward. Dominic's command echoed through the bond as much as through the air. Drive them back to the pass. The Blackstone wolves rallied around their king and the mysterious Omega fighting at his side. What they lacked in numbers, they made up for in desperation. This was their home, their families, everything they'd ever known. They would not fall without a fight. Ren lost track of time. The battle became a blur of blood and power, of absorbing attacks and redirecting them, of feeling Dominic's presence beside her like a constant flame. She'd never felt so strong. Never felt so connected to another living thing. It was terrifying. And wonderful. And she never wanted it to end. But the southern forces kept coming. For every enhanced wolf they cut down, two more took its place. The Blackstone warriors were falling, their numbers dwindling, their formation beginning to crack. We can't hold them. Sarah's voice cut through the chaos. She'd refused to stay in the keep, had insisted on fighting beside her siblings despite having no combat training. Now she stood back to back with Ronan, the beta tracker, both of them bleeding from a dozen wounds. There are too many. Dominic's wolf snarled, redoubling his efforts, but even he was slowing. They'd been fighting for hours. Even an Alpha King couldn't sustain this pace forever. And then the Berserker came. It emerged from the rear of the southern forces, and the moment Ren saw it, her blood turned to ice. It had been a wolf once. She could see traces of the original creature in its massive frame, its 4 legs, its elongated muzzle. But the Institute had twisted it into something monstrous, 12 feet tall at the shoulder, covered in matted fur and surgical scars, its eyes completely white and unseeing. It moved wrong. Jerky, uncoordinated, driven by nothing but rage. The enhanced wolves parted before it, and Ren understood why. This thing didn't differentiate between friend and enemy. It would destroy anything in its path. The berserker's howl split the air, a sound of pure agony that made every wolf on the battlefield freeze. Ren knew that sound. Had made that sound herself, in the darkest nights of her captivity, when the pain became too much and her mind started to crack. They broke it, she realized with horror. They tortured it until nothing was left but suffering. Fall back. Dominic was shifting, returning to human form to issue commands. Everyone fall back. Let it through. But there was nowhere to fall back to. The berserker was between them and the keep, cutting off their retreat. And it was accelerating, building speed, about to crash into their already broken lines. I can stop it. The words left Ren's mouth before she'd consciously decided to speak them. Dominic's head snapped toward her. What? My ability. I absorb power from any wolf that attacks me. If I take the berserker's full strength. No. His voice was iron. Absolutely not. That thing is insane, Ren. Its mind is completely shattered. If you absorb that, I might be able to redirect it. Turn its own rage against itself. Or you might lose yourself entirely. He grabbed her shoulders, forcing her to meet his eyes. I won't allow it. I'd rather lose the kingdom than lose you. The berserker was 50 yards away now. 40. The ground shook with each thunderous step. Ren looked at her brother, her twin, her mate, the only family she had left, and made her choice. I'm sorry, she whispered. But I'm not losing you either. She tore free of his grip and ran directly into the berserker's path. The impact was like nothing she'd ever experienced. The berserker's first blow caught her across the chest, and the power that flooded into her was nuclear. Not just strength, madness. Decades of torture and conditioning, of pain so absolute it had burned away everything that made a wolf a person. Rage without direction, suffering without end, a mind screaming into a void that never answered. Ren dropped to her knees, drowning. This is what they wanted, she realized through the chaos. This is what they tried to make me. The berserker struck again. More power poured in, and Ren screamed as her own consciousness began to fragment. She could feel herself dissolving, feel her identity being swallowed by the monster's endless agony. She'd been so arrogant. So certain she could handle anything after surviving the Institute. But this creature had suffered longer than she had. Had been broken more completely. And its madness was consuming her, rewriting her mind, turning her into another berserker that would destroy everything in its path. Let go, the rage whispered. Stop fighting. Embrace the pain. Become what you were always meant to be. Somewhere far away, she heard Dominic screaming her name. Ren. Ren. Come back to me. Not a command. Not dominance. Just desperation, raw and real and soaked in something she didn't recognize. I just found you. I can't lose you again. Please. The mate bond flared, cutting through the madness like a blade of light. She could feel him reaching for her, not with power but with love, unconditional, overwhelming, the kind of love she'd stopped believing existed. You are not alone, his voice said through the bond. You will never be alone again. Whatever darkness is trying to take you, I will fight it. We will fight it together. Just come back to me. Ren grabbed onto that voice like a lifeline. The berserker's rage still churned inside her, but now she could see it clearly, a tortured wolf, just like her, that had never known anything but pain. It hadn't chosen to become a monster. It had been made into one, systematically and deliberately, by people who saw wolves as weapons instead of living beings. I'm sorry, she thought, reaching into the heart of the madness. I'm sorry for what they did to you. I'm sorry no one came to save you. She found the tiny spark still buried at the center of the berserker's consciousness, the last fragment of the wolf it had once been, trapped and screaming and desperate for release. Let me help you, she offered. Let me end the pain. For one eternal moment, the spark looked at her. Recognized her. Understood what she was offering. Then it surrendered. Ren redirected every ounce of absorbed power back into the berserker, but this time, she shaped it. Focused it. Instead of rage, she gave it peace. Instead of endless suffering, she gave it release. The berserker's wide eyes cleared for just an instant. It looked at her, really looked at her, and something like gratitude flickered across its ruined features. Then it collapsed, finally free from the prison the Institute had built inside its mind. Ren fell beside it. She woke in silk sheets, warm sunlight streaming across her face. For a moment, she didn't know where she was. Didn't know who she was. The berserker's memories were still tangled with her own, fading slowly like a nightmare upon waking. Easy. A familiar voice, rough with exhaustion. Don't try to move yet. Dominic sat beside her bed, looking like he hadn't slept in days. His clothes were still stained with blood from the battle, and dark circles shadowed his golden eyes. Did we win? Her voice came out as a croak. Something broke in his expression, relief and grief and wonder all tangled together. We won. The southern forces surrendered after the berserker fell. Their alpha tried to flee, but Ronan caught him at the border. The enhanced wolves? Being treated in the lower halls. Our healers think some of them can be rehabilitated. He hesitated. You saved them, Ren. Saved all of us. If you hadn't stopped that thing. I almost didn't. She struggled to sit up, and he was immediately there, supporting her. I almost lost myself in its madness. But you didn't. His hand found hers, their fingers intertwining. You heard me. You came back. She had. Through all that darkness, through decades of borrowed suffering, his voice had been the light she'd followed home. The door opened behind them, and Ren looked up to find the entire Blackstone Council filing into the healing chambers. Sarah was with them, her arm in a sling, tears already streaming down her face. Dominic rose, but he didn't release her hand. There's something I need to do. Something that should have been done 32 years ago. He turned to face the assembled council, and his voice rang with the authority of a king. Lords and ladies of Blackstone, I present to you Ren Miriam Thorne, my twin sister, stolen at birth by our mother's treachery and sold to the Ashford Institute. She has survived horrors beyond imagining. She has freed herself from captivity, exposed the crown's darkest secrets, and today, she fought beside me to save our kingdom from destruction. Murmurs rippled through the council, but no one interrupted. My sister is the rightful princess of Blackstone. Any who challenge her legitimacy will answer to me personally. His grip on her hand tightened. She has earned her place here. More than earned it. And I will not tolerate any wolf who suggests otherwise. Silence. Then Lord Chen, one of the few allies who hadn't withdrawn during Ren's accusations, stepped forward and dropped to one knee. Princess Ren, he said formally. Welcome home. One by one, the others followed. Kneeling before her. Acknowledging her birthright. Ren stared at them, this council of strangers who'd served the crown that destroyed her life. She waited for the rage to resurface, for the familiar hatred to tell her this was wrong, that she didn't belong here, that these wolves were her enemies. It didn't come. When the council finally rose and began filing out, Dominic turned back to her. His expression had shifted, still exhausted, still carrying the weight of everything they'd survived, but something softer underneath. There's one more thing, he said quietly. One more question I need to ask. Ren's heart stuttered. She knew what was coming. Had felt it building since the moment she'd woken in his arms. The mate bond, he continued. I know you didn't choose it. I know you spent weeks fighting it, and I know you have every reason to reject it. But... He swallowed, and for just a moment, the powerful Alpha King looked like a nervous boy. I'm asking anyway. Will you accept it? Will you accept me? She looked at him. This brother she'd come to kill, this king she'd wanted to destroy, this mate fate had forced upon her. She thought about the throne she'd once wanted to burn, the kingdom she'd once wanted to see fall, the family she'd once believed was her enemy. She thought about the voice that had pulled her back from madness. The arms that had caught her when she fell. The eyes that looked at her like she was something precious instead of something broken. For 16 years, she'd felt nothing but rage. Now she felt something else. Yes, she whispered. I accept it. I accept you. Dominic's smile broke across his face like sunrise, and when he kissed her, it felt like coming home. 300 miles south, in the rubble of the destroyed Institute facility, a figure emerged from a hidden passage. Dr. Elias Webb brushed dust from his coat and surveyed the wreckage with mild irritation. Years of research, gone. Decades of carefully cultivated specimens, destroyed. The Southern Alpha's army had been promising, but ultimately insufficient. No matter. The true experiment had never been about creating weapons. He pulled a worn notebook from his pocket and flipped to the latest entry. Readings from the battle, transmitted by the monitoring devices he'd implanted in the Berserker's skull before its deployment. The data was extraordinary. The Omega had absorbed the Berserker's full power that should have shattered any normal wolf's mind. But instead of breaking, she'd transformed it. Redirected it. Used it to grant peace instead of destruction. Just as the ancient texts had predicted. Dr. Webb smiled as he made his final notation. Subject 7 has exceeded all projections. The absorption ability has evolved beyond offensive applications into something unprecedented. She did not simply steal power, she healed the damage, restored what was broken. This confirms our hypothesis. The Thorn bloodline carries the dormant gene. With the right catalyst, extreme trauma, prolonged experimentation, the mate bond to an alpha of sufficient strength, the awakening occurs. Subject 7 is proof of concept. The others must now be located and activated. He closed the notebook and tucked it back into his coat. Around him, the ruins of the facility smoldered in the morning light. Phase 1 complete, he whispered to no one. Now we wake the others. He turned and walked into the forest, already planning his next moves. The experiment was far from over. It was only beginning. Thank you for watching this video. Subscribe, like and share this video to continue listening to this type of story daily and also, to appreciate this community too. I would like to hear your wonderful opinion about this story. Please comment below.